affordable mass. That's the biggest opportunity. It's the biggest gap across pretty much everything. It's like, how do I build enough of things to matter? A lot of high-end systems, that we've built these production lines around, and they have to cover all of these range of military operations, and now we can't build enough of them, and they're too much money, and they're being depleted in a way that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. The next step is like, now do the same thing with a fixed wing drone that has some kind of range and some kind of payload, and you could bring out something. You can reach out and touch something in like the deep area, for instance. Those are the volumes and the mass that I'm worried about, that I am completely focused on. There's actually very little mass that you can bring to bear in that, because the long range systems are going after the 2,000, 3,000 mile targets, and the quad rotors are holding down the fort in no man's land at the 30 kilometers. So you have this void, this donut that really exists between the close and then strategic interdiction, this deep area. There's a void of mass on both ends. Production is a deterrent. Prototypes don't deter. You need mass, you need to field it at scale, and you need to integrate it with the force on a timeline that matters. That is what deters conflict.
Hey everyone, and thanks for listening to another episode of DIB Innovators. Today I'm speaking with Mike Benitez, CEO of Purple Rhombus, an Austin-based defense manufacturing firm delivering attritable UASs to the DoW. Mike is a decorated F-15E Wizzo combat veteran, contributing editor at War in the Rocks, and one of the clearest thinkers on defense that I've seen when we talk about what it actually takes to produce weapons at scale. So Mike, thanks for joining.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it. It's been a while. I'm glad we finally got a chance to sit down and chat.
Yeah, no, this is good. It's keep running into each other out in the field, but let's get into your background because I think it's fascinating. Marine, then you're flying combat missions and a Strike Eagle, the Capitol Hill, Shield AI, Purple Rhombus. Talk me through a little bit of that journey, and if there were any key lines that you've continued to pull together intel that goes, we got a problem and I want to help solve this in the industrial delivery of capability.
Yeah, I guess without going through the entire 30 years or so, that was a good summary of 30 years of my experience. But yeah, about 8 years enlisted in the Marine Corps in aviation as a mechanic and a door gunner. Then I did Air Force officer, weapons school as Top Gun for the Air Force. Another 17 years or so active duty there. Did all the overseas stuff. Did the Pentagon. Worked on the Hill in Congress for a senator. So I've got some legislative background. Bunch of fellowships, DARPA, Silicon Valley, some think tank stuff, and was looking at the end of my career of like, what am I gonna do next? And I decided that this is now at 6 or so years ago, maybe, that I thought that software autonomy, and bringing AI into the military was going to be a big thing. And this is before it all really exploded. So got into the software side originally, pushing mission autonomy, network collaborative autonomy, things like how can we bring unmanned systems into our force integration and force design to augment what we're doing. So man-to-man teaming, which loyal wingmen, collaborative combat aircraft, those kinds of things started kind of all happening. And I was in the middle of it. It was amazing to see all that play out. Truly grateful for all those opportunities I had. And in the thesis, this goes again back 6 or 7 years maybe, the thesis that we kind of all started with was, can you bring average or good enough hardware and complement it with really, really good software? So you really do have software-enabled hardware capabilities. Could you do that in a way that could contribute to the principles of war, which I'm sure we'll dig into, to fill these really massive critical capability gaps all across the forces that have been happening? And this is all before even Ukraine and everything happened. So that's kind of how I got started on the software side. Turns out, fast forward, on the hardware side, it was much easier to say that than to actually do it. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. And so I ended up moving late last year from software focused to now hardware focused, which is, I think, a little bit backwards from really what most people in industry would think. You'd think software is where you want to be. There's a lot of great stuff going on with software, but I decided that I was looking for a fresh set of problems. It was an unsolved problem. And so I thought I would try to meet the moment and move from software to hardware.
Oh, that's awesome. So give me a timing of like War on Rock. So that's a great, thought piece that you started, back in what, 2018, 2017, somewhere in
Oh,
there.
I didn't start it. No, Ryan,
Or worked on it, I should say. Yes.
yeah, I started. So Ryan Evans started War on the Rocks back in like 2012 timeframe, 2013. I think I got involved in 2014, something like that. And so, yeah, I've been a contributor editor almost from the beginning. Yeah. And, and honestly, like the reason I got into that and writing in general, it's a communication skill. Just and like just like briefing and debriefing and just oral presentations, repetition, right? Get your sets and reps. It's a skill. It's a long time to refine, and it atrophies, right? If you don't do it for a while, you kind of get bad at it. So I actually got hurt, and so I was medically down from flying for a good bit, and so I had to pivot my energy into another outlet that was not just tactical aviation and flying and doing that. And so I pivoted from that into writing and thinking more deeply about some things. And really, that's how the whole thing got started for me in my writing, my professional writing aspect. And that was a forcing function to help me think through and really think deeply about some things and bringing that kind of eclectic set of experiences that I've lived through and this a unique lens that I kind of view a lot of problems with, and that's kind of how I went down that path for a while.
You mentioned, you went to, you moved over to the hardware side, so Purple Rhombus with that. But there were a lot of other companies doing this a year and a half ago. You know, what did you see in the space of people? You had the drones, you've got the Skydios, you've got smaller groups that or unmanned systems that told you that there's an opportunity there that's not being, seized.
So if you go back to at the very like first principles problem solving, there's a few threads to pull on that. The first one is at the very very macro level. You have the principles of war, which is there's a way to remember it. It's called Moose Mus. So you have mass, objective, offense, security, economy of force, maneuver, unity of command, surprise, and simplicity. Okay. If you macro level, and they exist as separate words in the overall principles for a reason, right? So there are things that you can do where you can leverage surprise. So I have a special capability or some kind of technological advantage that gives me a maneuver, offensive, and a surprise advantage, and I can use that to augment my mass deficiencies to a point, right? And so that's what really the modern U.S. military, whether it's in the air domain, the land domain, or the sea domain, it's basically prioritize a lot of those other objectives at the expense of mass. And so like mass is mass for a reason. You can artificially inflate it through these other capabilities, but at the end of the day, you have to have, it's a it's an atoms and bits problem, right? You need the atoms to go with the bits. And so you need to be able to build stuff. And so you become a scale and a production problem. And if you notice, the most of the legacy programs, they have here's your program of record for the next 20 years. You're going to build all the stuff out, and so you build these factories and these production lines around that one thing, right? So I had this generational program, and there's a bunch of reasons that the industry ossified around that. Some of the reasons are that I can't afford four interceptor programs, so I'm just going to have one big one that can cover all four missions, which is great when you look at simplicity. But in execution, everyone's seeing playing out with Iran, you sacrifice economy of force because now my high-end systems are being allocated against low-end threats. And so you have to have the right tool in the toolbox. And so that's why most of the problems that you have in the U.S. military all come back to balancing the principles of war. So you're making trade-offs. And one of the key bill pairs for 30 years plus has really been mass, right? At the end of the day, it's mass. And so I got really, really interested in understanding like we have a big, big mass problem. And the secondary part of that is we have a big economy of force problems. We have a lot of high-end systems, that we've built these production lines around, and they have to cover all of these range of military operations. And now we can't build enough of them, and they're too much money, and they're being depleted in a way it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So I say all that to say, when you start digging into mass with economy of force and you pair them together, you have to build enough of the right thing and allocate it to solving the right tactical problem at a cost exchange and operational efficiency that makes sense. And most of the things that you see play out or have seen play out in the past, call it 5 years or so, on the UAS side, a lot of great companies doing lots of things, but you kind of industry is really a reflection of what you incentivize from the customer, right? So collectively, the Department of War, again, if you go back 6 or so years, even less than that, maybe in 3 years, you'll see a number of experimentation campaigns, demonstrations, prototype initiatives, these like continual competition things, because they're in this campaign of learning, right? And so these companies are trying to meet that moment. And so you see 3D printing where they can design something, print something in a day. They can change a design in a week. You have these batch builds of these hand laid, composites and fiberglass layups, which again meet what the customer was looking for. But now I'd say the Department of War is not interested in prototypes; they're interested in production. And the problem is you can't take something that is optimized for rapid prototyping and also build it at industrial scale. Those are completely different engineering challenges. There's 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 obviously some overlap, so you can produce some things at a certain scale, but the economies start to break down eventually. So if you went to the extreme and said if you were just gonna design something that you can build thousands and thousands of, and I'm not talking quadcopters to be clear, talking group 2, group 3, so you're like 40 to call it 40 to 200 pound class of UASs. How would you do it and how could you do it cheaply where you get economies of scale? And so if you go back to the first principles of design for manufacture, how would I do that? Or design for cost, which is a different, way of looking at it, or design for supply, DFS. And then you have DFA, design for assembly. These are all industrial engineering principles to build a product that would solve mass. But most companies that have existed, all the ones that I was looking at trying to work with on the software side, almost none of them approached their products from that perspective. And so I saw this big, big gap in the market where if someone was going to build a company from scratch, how would you do it? How could you leverage the industrial base that exists, which is a different set of problem we could talk to, and build this mass to fill these gaps that we see in the UAS space, specifically the Group 2, Group 3. And turns out Purple Rhombus is doing it. And I happen to know the co-founders as they were getting it up and running. And, we started talking and I was actually looking for a hardware company to put software on, and they were doing exactly what I would do if I was going to build a company. And so very early on, we started a conversation, and yada yada yada. Now I'm over there at Purple Rhombus.
That's awesome. So we'll get to Purple Rhombus in a sec, but how do you think, are you seeing the Pentagon's demand signal changing the behaviors? I mean, you guys are there. There's a couple, offhand, I know, Havoc AI, for example, is doing similar on the boat. They're now a software company that does boats as well as other things. They're focused on the AI side. Are you more focused, like Purple Rhombus, from, the hardware side? Are you more of a software company that just is able to patch onto hardware? Like, how are you approaching, that angle?
We are a manufacturing company. We're a hardware-centric company. We use some software tools to enable the hardware development and production, but we're not trying to, moonlight as an AI company or anything like that. We are a high rate production manufacturing company solving the UAS problem.
And so then to my point, do you think is the demand signal from the Pentagon changing at all how folks are approaching this, or are there still very few that are receiving the message that you need to be able to produce mass?
Yeah, I think what you see in public and there's stuff going on in private, and they kind of rhyme, maybe a little bit different. So publicly, drone dominance is probably like the big thing that everyone's heard of. There's the Department of War aspect, which is we're going to create a crystal clear demand signal for the quadcopters, Group 1. You're under 20-pound type things. Most of them are quadcopters, and there's some coaxials out there, but mostly we're talking quadcopters. Everyone has that quad rotor in their mind when you think of drone dominance. The price point and the scale are really, really big forcing functions, crystal clear demand signals. And I think it's awesome that the Department of War is putting out that. I would also say, again, high rate production, low prices that represent those production volumes. So there's that. I would also say for those of you who may not track it as closely, this is a whole of government approach. So now the Department of Commerce, after drone dominance started, with that clear demand signal, the Department of Commerce shut off all of the Chinese components. And so you have no other option than to onshore, reshore domestic supply chains to meet that crystal clear demand signal. And so it was a coordinated approach from the Department of War and Department of Commerce to have that push pull to reshore and onshore those capabilities for the industrial base. So time will tell, how it matures over time. There's $1 billion behind it, and there's something like 300,000 quad rotors that they want to field in the next 2 years or so, 3 years. So I think that is awesome. But you could have 300,000 quadcopters in the Indo-Pacific, and China's not going to care. So it's not going to put a dent in that, right? But it is a good start. It's a good start. But I'd say that the next step is like, now do the same thing with a fixed wing drone that has some kind of range and some kind of payload, and you could bring out something. You can reach out and touch something in like the deep area, for instance, or strategic interdiction, if you want to go even further than that. And those are the volumes and the mass that I'm worried about, that I am completely focused on, is like, how do I solve the you ever heard of the Ukrainian donut? Oh, okay. So Ukraine is a great example. So if you go back to 2022, the rise of the quadcopters was a direct result of two things. Number one, they fought with what they had, right? Adaptation. What can we bring right now to bear? And they had some equipment gaps, right? The second rise of the quadcopter reason was the lack of 155. And so if you look at and that's not just artillery, it's the barrels as well. They wore out barrels. They couldn't get barrels. So they had artillery, they had the shells, but not the barrels, and then vice versa. So the quadcopter explosion in Ukraine was a direct result of this capability gap. What you saw over time is that you saw about 7 kilometers is about the max effective range in 2022. And as the quad rotors got better and they had bigger and bigger battery packs or more efficient, you saw that the range of a quadcopter went from 7 to 10 to 12 to 15 kilometers. Then it went to 20 kilometers. And now we're out to like the limits of physics. It's out to 25 or even 30 kilometers is like the max range of some of these quadcopter systems. And that has actually defined no man's land, right? So both sides have quad rotors that go 25 kilometers in each direction. That's the kill zone. And as the war devolved into an attrition, warfare style, that is what defined the front lines. And so the problem now becomes if you have no man's land, let's call it 30 kilometers from end to end, just outside 30 kilometers is where the quad rotors physics like just won't get there, right? And so there's this donut where 30 kilometers to about, call it 150 kilometers, and sometimes out to 300, there's actually very, very little mass that you can bring to bear in that, because the long range systems are going after the 2,000, 3,000 mile targets, and the quad rotors are holding down the fort in no man's land at the 30 kilometers. So you have this void, this donut that really exists between the close and then strategic interdiction. This deep area is there's a void of mass on both ends. And so it's important, because you just look at Army doctrine or how they fight. You want to bring to bear this saturation in that donut, which is traditionally where artillery can't reach, but rockets do, like your MLRS, HIMARS, that kind of stuff. The shortage of that, even at volume, now we have Group 2 and Group 3 drones with kinetics on it that are trying to address that gap. Just like the 155 gap is the rise of the quad rotor, the same thing is happening with now the rise of the Group 2 and Group 3 in Ukraine. And here we are, it's 2026. We're 4 or 5 years now into this conflict, and it's just now starting to catch up. Like, hey, this is a problem. If we can't hold these targets at risk, the vehicle staging areas, logistics, their supply chains, the C2 nodes, the air defense systems, those are all living in the donut right now that are relatively, I don't want to say it that they're not able to hold at risk, but it's a lot harder to strike them, and they have a lot of immunity from attack right now. And so what you see in Ukraine, if you take that exact model and move it to the Pacific, the donut in the Pacific is going to be starting at that, call it 100 miles minimum, but it's going to go out to 1,500 miles or so. Then that's where it's going to be really, really hard. That's a tough problem because it's a scale and a tyranny of distance problem.
Yeah, it's crazy. We all see it, and we talked about just how quickly we ran out of munitions, and all these words as a munition problem. I mean, across the board, and we've known this for years. I mean, we went over, the China direction just from an air-to-air weapons perspective. Very simple. We'd run out so quick, and this is just highlighted, which I'm happy for. That maybe it's helping the acquisition process accelerate. But are you seeing signals from your side that besides the drone, just munitions at large are getting more, more prioritization in the budget?
Yeah, they are, and I'll tell you, like, this is I used to work the munitions portfolio for the Air Force, when I was in DC, and this is, 12 years ago, something like that, 10, 12 years ago, and even back then, we have this annual brief, and it's like, "Here are all the munitions inventories, stockpiles, here's where they're at, here's what the line should be on all," like, the little, barometer, and it's like, and like, "Hey, why don't you buy more munitions?" Like, well, for a few reasons. Number one, they're bill payers. Everyone just takes the money and raids the accounts and put them in, to buy other stuff. Because those decisions don't ever manifest while you're there, right? So you want to have an impact. If I spend all my money on munitions and it helps, someone 5 years from now, like, how does it help me like look good? So there's that. Not saying me personally, but there's that dynamic. The other dynamic is that you couldn't get multi-year authorities. So every year you would only contract for 1 year of production. And so like industry was like, I have no demand signal. It goes up and down. You tell me you're going to request, 500 munitions. And when finally it gets through Congress, I get 100 on contract. Like, what am I supposed to do with my workforce? And so what you saw, this cat and mouse game had kind of happened over time where industry like, yeah, we're going to surge we'll surge to 1,000, and they'll say that. They'll plan for, 700, and they'll get 500 under contract. And so over time, they were just kind of schmedium, peanut butter spread the capabilities because they couldn't get long-term commitments. They couldn't get multi-year contract authorities. So it was a Congress problem. It was a Pentagon problem, and it was an industry problem. Right now, all three of those are being solved. And so I think that's a good thing. It's a really, really good thing. We have, I think, the very first one was Lockheed Martin's Patriot. They committed to a 7-year block buy, which is like, man, the amount of industrial capacity you can invest in, knowing that you're going to have a hotline for 7 years, like that is incredible. And there's a bunch of other ones. Pretty much every single legacy program, what we used to call preferred munitions, whether it's Patriots, THAADs, Tomahawks, JASSM, LRASM, AMRAAMs, those kinds of, they're all getting these multi-year block buy ramp ups. The concern is then what, right? Like if you don't have and this goes back into a little bit of attrition models and affordable mass. Once those inventories, if they ever actually get full, then what? What happens to those production lines is they're going to go back to where they were before, and so the cycle will continue. And I'm not saying that that's a good or bad thing. I'm just saying it's the dynamics of how the programs exist.
Yeah, it's a thing. Episodic spending. You get, I guess, all that. Unless you bring it into like, I guess, there needs to be a strategy behind it though, because then we run into the same problem.
Yeah, and then you'd say like, well, foreign materials, foreign sales, FMS, that's a way that you can have this other demand signal to like extend your production, which is true, right? But there's international implications. People want to reshore their own capabilities. Now, if you take that and you say, well, what if, again, if blank piece of paper, if you were going to build a program for drones, how would you um, build it so that you didn't end up with that problem, right? Which means you have to build a production consumption model, which is one of the big things that I've been thinking a lot about over the past year or so. It really got serious over the past few months, and I wrote a piece on War on the Rocks about it. Was, if you can have a way that you had this continuous depletion, planned obsolescence, and this dual use demand, you can create the consumption side of the model that would keep production at a very, very healthy level and stable. And the reason I say that is that you could in peacetime you have production consumption, but now something happens, you need to surge production, you almost have built-in surge by just turning off your consumption model that you have. And so like, hey, we're going to cut off the dual use demand or minimize that. Our continuous depletion. So we're going to cut our training expenditures and now we're going to just pivot that into building up our inventory. And so you have a little bit of a buffer that you can build into these programs. And no program in the Pentagon is really structured that way, not even ammo, weirdly enough. But that's a really, really important part of like building these drones at scale, right? Because you want to build enough of them, but you have to continue to build them. So number one, they keep getting better. You have inventory turnover and depletion. And if you treat them as ammo, which you should for these attritable drones, that is how you get to the production consumption model.
I think that's true, especially those big programs have, tech refreshes built in, different things. These smaller don't, but the tech's changing pretty fast, you go roll out, let's say you have a company like yours gets a big 10,000 unit build. 2 years into that whole thing could be different. So that's how to handle that acquisition side. How have you seen it, like when you guys talk about, potential builds of what if technology does change in 2 years? Is that built into the contract? Or are you renegotiating it?
Yeah, I'd say every contract's an opportunity, right? But I'd say from a strategy perspective, I think of it as two ways. I'll use our group two as an example. Our go to market group two. It's called the Grackle. So there are certain things that are going to change, right? Like just inevitable. Like, oh, I want a different payload, I want a different radio, that kind of thing. I want a different sensor. And there are certain things that kind of endure, right? And so the basics, the physics of an aircraft are pretty well known. Like once you dial in the physics of it, the center of gravity, the payload, what can it do? Like just the physics. Physics is physics, not going to change. We basically have a bifurcation in our product strategy where we have the back end, if you will, of the product development and management and production, and that's the truck, right? It's like it's got the wing looks like this, the tail looks like this, the fuselage is this big. Here's what it is, and here's how you put it together. And we go to the nth degree for design for manufacture, design for cost, design for assembly, and design for supply. So that back end high rate production of this truck is a thing, right? I didn't say it was going to do anything though, right? Now I take that inventory and that supplies of attritable drones, and now I have my missionization, which is like the front end, if you will. And so now there I can go, I want a one-way attack, or I want this type of ISR, or I want an aerial target. Those are kind of three main, product shred outs, if you will. Now those are always changing, right? But I don't have to go back and redesign the drone. I have, I have 1,000 drones on the shelf. What do you want them to do? And so we think of like back end production supply and then front end production supply, the missionization. We treat that as a separate line of effort. And that bifurcation allows us to keep the economies of scale in a way that we can build a lot of things on a really, really quick timeline. And we can do it at a price that's extremely compelling for our primary customers.
That's great. Well, let's then go a little bit more to you specifically. Tell us about Purple Rhombus, how many different that you can talk about, how many different, platforms are you building? How are you getting these affordable? What are the key pieces that you're doing to deliver this mass, production capability?
Yeah, let's actually start at the very beginning of how Purple Rhombus even started. So it's probably the first, well, not the first. It's one of the very few startups that exists at the request of one of the customers. So the about 2 years ago, the Air Force came to our one of our sister companies now, which is a well-established company that builds aircraft parts for all of the primes. And the Air Force said, "Hey, we've been looking for a way to build a whole lot of drones really cheap. You guys have been building aircraft parts since 1947. Wings for an F-16, 737 parts, Chinook parts, all that stuff. Can you use the same stuff, and instead of building big aircraft, can you build small aircraft? And can you do it at scale where like the economy, the economics make sense?" And so that's how Purple Rhombus actually started. It started as a project, which then turned into a SBIR phase 2, and then that turned into a phase 3, and then we've split spun it out the LLC as a separate corporation with a separate, cap table financial structure. But that was really the proof of concept is could you do this? And it's like turns out we got the receipts. Yes, you can do it. And the business case from the company perspective and the business case from the end user perspective is extremely compelling at scale and affordability. And so that's kind of how we started. And so now that we have this, we got this phase two. You need a platform to prove out the process and get the math done. And so Grackle is our go to market. It's a forcing function to mature all of our design for manufacturing processes. And there's some other things that kind of go behind that, which really helps us kick scale into another gear. We can maybe talk about in a little bit. But that was really the forcing function was our group two. That's really what we're focused on right now. We do have we have a few other things that we have in motion that we can't really talk about yet. Hopefully by Christmas you'll see our second main thing that we have going on. It's extremely exciting, and I really wish I could tell you more about it, but I'm going to keep that one a little close to the vest for a while.
I'll have to come back and talk about it.
Yeah.
That's good. So you're using are you creating new like manufacturing processes from your parent company or just kind of refining them? Or how did that, they said, yes, we can do this, but are you then bringing the best and greatest that they may not have been able to scale to? How does that look?
Yeah, so that's the second part. So the first part is they're designed for manufacture. Can you do this? It's like, yes. Do the economies of scale work out? Yes. This is very compelling. Now you have the strategy of like, how do you do it smartly? So the second part of our what Purple Rhombus does is we use a distributed co-production ecosystem model. So what that means is that we can tap the current industrial base that exists with the current workforce, the current factories, the current tooling, and the excess capacity that's just sitting dormant in the industrial base to actually build a majority of our products for us. We don't need a 100,000 square foot factory and an outfit with all this equipment. We are leveraging the industrial base that exists today, and I could pretty confidently say that we're probably one of the few vendors that can show that has the receipts that can show you that there's a path, for a group 2 drones that say it goes 100 miles. There's a path where in the US industrial base, you can build 100,000 of those a year and scale up higher than that if you wanted to, right? Um, Without getting even too fancy. You can get to 1 million drones a year using our corporate strategy, using the existing industrial base. It can be done. We can show you how to do it. And so when I talk about mass and scale, that's the kind of numbers I'm talking about.
Yeah, that resonates a little differently than a couple hundred, a couple thousand.
Yeah. So part of that is maybe share a little bit as we're looking at how do we scale and how do we scale smartly. Some of it's time, right? So if I go out and raise money and I want to spend that money, call it on capex, which a lot of companies do when they need to scale hardware. I need to go get a big factory. I need to go equip the factory. I need a bigger workforce. I need the tooling. And so it's flash to bang on that capital is call it 3 years or so, right? And I'm not saying it doesn't need to happen. It absolutely does. Like Andrew's building Arsenal One, up in Ohio right now. Like, did that need to exist? Like, sure, it sure does, right? What we're saying is that for the type of things that we're doing, there is plenty of industrial capacity everywhere if you just know where to look. So all the things that we could do to focus our time and resources on execution and OpEx, operation expenses, and not CapEx. That's what we're really focused on right now.
Ah, that's very unique. So you hear the other side is a lot of the other strategies like take it all and just go vertical. I want to own the whole thing. I don't want to rely on anybody, because of supply chain risks. Are you concerned about that as you look at that strategy?
No, not at all. And then there's a few reasons why. At the scale that I have as a vision of where we want to go, there's no single vendor for anything, right? It just can't. Like no one can support that. And I'll give you one example. There's a early on we are talking about supply chain build out, and I'm talking like 4 or 5 company redundant supply chains, right? So we started off and I'm like, well, what about, again, I'll use our go-to-market, our Grackle group too. And it's got 4 servos. So we're talking to our chief engineer. I'm like, well, tell me about the servo supply chain. He's like, well, we have a vendor that could build 8,000 servos a month. So we're good. I'm like, we're not good. We're not good at all. I'm like, well, why? I'm like, well, there's 4 servos per drone. And so if you take 8,000 divided by 4, that's 2,000, right? Like their entire pipeline, 100% of their inventory can support 2,000 drones a month. Number one, that's not enough. Number two, it would be irresponsible of that company to sell us 100% of their pipeline, right? What a massive risk that company would be taking. So we start making assumptions like, well, let's assume that 30 to 50% of available production inventory is available for consumption by us, right? So how do we build a model around that? And so it leads you down to this path where like, I've got 5 different servo vendors, and turns out as we go through these production builds, we build out this supplier ecosystem, and eventually, we'll get there where, I've got my 5, again, my hypothetical 5 servo vendors, and I've got to order for, 100 this month, 10,000 next month, and I can actually level load my supply system in real time almost by just doing this kind of bidding marketplace. And these are all vetted suppliers in our ecosystem. And so we think that's a really, really powerful way to leverage a lot of companies across America. The industrial base capacity exists for airframe components, wiring harnesses, motors, and at the scale that we're talking about, the only way that you really get that better buying power from us and to pass it on to our customer is to have this ecosystem where you can bring everyone in. And again, you're not going from like, here's 10,000 one month, 0 the next month. You're level loading it across your entire vendor pool, so they can stay healthy and they can stay predictable.
So this is interesting, but in order to do that, you're talking about, like you said, large numbers, and so that definitely makes a difference.
Yeah. Now of course the trick is, if you have a large, this is where a little bit of the, GovCon comes in. You need a large demand signal, right? But you also need competition, which typically means that you chop up the demand signal into, 10 or 20 things, like drone dominance, for example. Drone dominance is, there's like 10 or 11 vendors that are in the current gauntlet. Start with 25. If you gave one vendor like 300,000 drone order, I mean, they would just collapse right now. But there's a way to grow responsibly, but you need that balance, that size of the demand signal to unlock those different levels of the ecosystem to build it out. And so we are engineering our production and our distributed co-production and our supply chains to be hyperscale hardware. And that obviously does require some kind of demand signal. And we're working on some creative ways to make all that happen, to create some win-win situations that we'll be able to share a little bit later this year.
Where are you seeing the most interest? Is this from a specific department, or like, Air Force, or is it Navy or Marine, or is it department in whole, or is it completely separate? Like, where's the
Ooh, I don't want to play favorites here, but I'll tell you, the Army, they've had a lot of demonstrations and a lot of prototyping efforts, but they they have their feet firmly under them about where they want to go. Even the past like 6 months, it's really started to be a lot more concrete and kind of action based instead of just kind of in theory and exploratory. So I think the Army is definitely running out in the lead of the pack, and there's a few reasons for that. But um, one of the interesting things that I was just talking to an Air Force leader not too long ago, maybe a week or two ago, and I was talking about this, and they're like, "What? What are you talking about?" so, so the back last, I guess, almost a year ago now, about 10 months ago, all of those defense reform memos and all those things that kind of came out of acquisition reform, and one of the things that's kind of in all of those execution memos and policy changes was to recharacterize attritable drones as ammo. And so you could buy them using O&M money. You didn't have to worry about sustaining them. If you if you crashed a drone, go get another one. You're not going to have to go fill out paperwork. And so the Army, they to their credit, they leaned into that like almost immediately. And so they have a number of efforts going on. Probably the most exciting one is the UAS marketplace. Have you ever heard of this?
I think
Yeah.
so. Yeah.
So it's literally an Amazon storefront for drones, and I say literally, like, Amazon developed it for the Army, and when you log in and look at it, it looks just like Amazon.com, except everything that you can buy are drones. The prices are listed, the star ratings are listed, the reviews are written. It looks um, exactly like an Amazon storefront. It's awesome. And if you're anyone that's listening, if you have a cat card, anyone with a cat card can actually log on and go look. And the interesting thing, well, there's a bunch of interesting things. You can go online and buy them. There's certain limits of how much you can spend, based on, GovCon stuff. But all of the prices are listed there. Like, those are the prices. And some of those prices will scare you, scary expensive for some of those products. And I think it's fantastic to put that out there, because now the customers can see how much the prices of products actually cost, which is probably one of the dirty secrets in business development, especially in defense, is like no one knows how much anything actually costs, right? Because no one advertises prices. So the storefront is really interesting, is that it forces you to put out your price for anyone who wants to buy your drone. This is the price, and you can see all the vendors. So in the vendor pool, I can log in. I can see all the other Group 2s and
You can see all
all
the
the quad
competitors. Yeah.
rotors.
Where do you
So
have to be?
it's a really interesting dynamic that they're using competition and transparency with these authorities to drive this competitive dynamic. So it's really, really fascinating. I think the Army is doing a really good job of that.
So the Air Force is surprised that what? They're getting ahead of it? Or
Well, they're like, "What? Drones are ammo?" Like, yeah, attritable drones are characterized as ammo. It's a policy change. Like, you can use O&M money and buy attritable drones. And so for all those Air Force people listening out there, you're gonna have your end of year fallout money coming, and so instead of buying like furniture and flat screen TVs, you could actually go buy some drones.
I talked to another company, they're building drones and they call it warfare as a service. So, but it's considered kind of the ammo. So, company commanders down at, captains, squadrons, depending on where you are, they could just go buy it like you would buy flat screen TVs at the end of the fiscal, like you talked about. Just go, we're going to go buy this many drones and capability, whatever it looks like. So,
In some cases, your government credit card, like, hey, what's the limit on your government credit card? Like, yeah, you can actually just use your credit card and buy this. So it's times are changing.
you're not kidding. How do you think, SBIR, so, you guys are using SBIR, their success story, well, there are some, I think, but a lot of times just people get stuck in this loop from trying to build a company. How's your perspective on, we getting a defense tech, company, maybe not a lot of dual use. Is SBIR's good, bad? How's it affecting the ecosystem?
It can be an extremely powerful tool if you approach it with the right outcomes in mind and you do it for the right reasons. Okay. So, I'll tell you, we're on a SBIR phase 3 that wouldn't have existed if we didn't have a phase 2, right? And there's other things that we purposely avoid or pursue certain opportunities in the SBIR based on where we want to go from our corporate strategy. We don't just throw a bunch of proposals at the wall and see what sticks, and then let that guide our corporate strategy. We have a strategy, and we need to stick to our plan. Now, obviously, there's emergent parts of it. Our strategy is gonna, it'll shape and steer over time, but it's not going to dramatically pivot. And so we're very deliberate of what we choose to pursue. Does this help, hurt, or change what we're doing, right? So we always kind of look at it that way. But SBIR is a fantastic program. I'm glad it got reauthorized. I think the new reauthorization, which is it adds the strategic breakthroughs. I think those are going to be fascinating to see play out. Where before, and I can't remember the specifics, but it's essentially what TAC-5 StratFi is for the Air Force, but now SBIR wide. So you can have for lack of a better term, a StratFi type award for like the Army, for instance, with the strategic breakthrough programs. I think that is going to be really interesting to see play out in the next year. The first tranche of awardees who get that, they're going to be the pathfinders for everyone in industry is going to be watching them. Of like, can you start in a phase 1 and get through this breakthrough, like real money behind it to go solve a real problem? Uh, SBIR has been a valley of death for in a lot of different ways, and I think this could be one of the big things that unlocks that.
Yeah, that's super cool. Well, that would be good because I talked to so many companies, that are trying to break through and they're just stuck. And then, government pauses funding and
Yeah, the reauthorization drag out that, I mean, what is that, 6 months or so, or 4 months of just everyone's just like wait and see, and yeah, now the floodgates are open again, and so like, oh, so now you're getting proposal writing, and I feel, having been on the other side of SBIRs when I was in uniform, I was on scoring teams, and so this was like the flood of like the open topics were probably the ones that were hurt the most. I was on a quick side story. I was on a scoring team of open topics, which means like every one of them's different, right? And there's like you have 1,100 phase 2 reviews to do in the next like 15 days. Like, oh my God. And this is all volunteers, right? That are doing this. And so you're trying to do what you can with what you have, and your heart's in the right place, but sometimes you do what you can. So I'm sure it's better now. That was probably 6 or 7 years ago. Hopefully it's better by now.
Hopefully they're able to figure out some useful way to use Claude or, something to at least break it down and summarize.
Yeah. And honestly, like the hardest part was like it was the open topics, because there's the topics are so wildly diverse and there's so many of them. Like, well, how am I supposed to objectively score and compare these and rack and stack them if they're so different? So it's great to have great new ideas kind of coming into the machine, but it gets harder and harder to rack and stack them when they're uncomparable in a ways.
Yeah, I'm sure. You could probably have, some nuclear technology to some logistics loader technology, to cyber, to some space, and some volunteer is going to go, that's a good idea. That's not. That's tough.
Yeah, it's really tough.
Well, man, we could keep going. I'm going to ask 5 questions real quick, just to kind of lightning round. You just kind of give your answers and then we'll roll it up
All right.
for today. So what's the biggest myth / conception about selling to the DoD?
That there's just one monolithic customer. There's probably hundreds of people who can buy your stuff if you know where to look.
Hardest lesson you've learned so far as you've been in this journey with Purple Rhombus?
Ooh. No news is not necessarily good news. I had some scar tissue from some prior experiences, and I kind of brought that in, and it bit me a little bit early on. I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm sure that's fine. I haven't heard about it in a week." I'm like, "No, no, no. Assume the worst. I hope for the best, assume the worst, and trust but verify for sure."
Yeah. Well, I'd love to just maybe at some event get to record, but love talking to you about business stuff because, your background and then jumping in, it's very different when you're the man in charge.
I'm learning a lot. Learning a lot
I'm
for
sure.
sure.
Well, it sounded like you have a great network support too to help you through this. So,
Oh, the team's great. Yeah, team's great. I could not ask for a better team, and I'm really enjoying it. Having a lot of fun. So solving problems, helping customers, and having fun while you're at it, man, that's a win-win-win.
oh yeah. What's the number one piece of advice you'd give someone starting a defense tech company today?
Talk to a customer before you do anything. There's nothing worse than you have these startups that are solving problems that are not the problem that you think they are. You don't understand the problem at all. Or even worse, it's actually a solved problem that has been solved a generation ago. You just don't know about it. And that's probably like the worst one, is like people just don't, in defense, you don't know what you don't know. And turns out the biggest problems are generally the ones we don't talk about a lot. So there's a lot of capabilities that are out there that people just don't know about. So please, like, have those conversations before you're like, I have a good idea. Like, ideas are everything. Like, that's not the thing, man. You gotta find the right problem, find the capability gap, and go and try to address it with who owns that problem. Find out who owns that problem.
Yeah, great advice. Sacred cow in defense tech that you think will be proven false?
Ooh. Ooh, how about this? You give me a couple sacred cows. What are some sacred cows?
Like, how AI is going to affect warfighting. That it's going to solve all the problems or manufacture. You could apply AI then to any sector, for example.
Yeah, I think okay, I'll throw out one that's definitely a sacred cow. I think stealth is going to evolve dramatically in a way that is not entirely foreseen yet. So if you know how RF low detection stuff works, there's a interesting knee in the curve that's happening, and you'll see in the next probably 5 or 10 years, you're going to see some pretty interesting sensor breakthroughs that go back to the drawing board in some of those things, potentially in some aspects, right? So stealth does not mean invisible.
Yeah, here. And biggest opportunity you see in defense right now across the board from a company building standpoint? And it may be yours.
Yeah, I mean, mass, right? Affordable mass. That's the biggest opportunity. It's the biggest gap across pretty much everything. It's like, how do I build enough of things to matter? And when I say matter, it's probably a good way to end. Production is a deterrent. Prototypes don't deter. You need mass, you need to field it at scale, and you need to integrate it with the force on a timeline that matters. That is what deters conflict. And huge opportunities across the board in pretty much every single component. Whether we don't have enough radios, we don't have enough batteries, we don't have enough solid rocket motors, like building. So much opportunities out there. And it's a really exciting time to have the opportunity to help.
Absolutely. Love it. We got to get going. How do people follow you or Purple Rhombus?
Yep, we're on LinkedIn. Check out our website, purple-rhombus.com. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn as well. Yeah, we'll have our press room is on our website, and we post on on LinkedIn as well.
Well, we look forward to hearing some good news soon, but it's been awesome. Thanks, Mike. We'll talk to you later.
Thanks, David.